I still remember the exact moment the summer cracked open like a fault line running straight through our quiet Florida subdivision. It was a Saturday in late June, the kind of day where the humidity hangs heavy and the cicadas scream from the oaks, their song rising and falling like a warning no one heeds until it's too late. The air smelled of chlorine and freshly cut St. Augustine grass, the scent of suburban perfection that masked the rot underneath, the kind of rot that starts with a smile and ends with a clipboard. My 16-year-old daughter Sarah stood at the edge of the community pool, water dripping from her ponytail in steady rivulets that caught the sunlight like tiny prisms, reaching for her towel on the lounge chair where she'd left it folded with the precision of someone who had learned early that order was safety. She had just finished her laps, the ones her physical therapist prescribed after the car accident that left her with a rebuilt knee, months of metal pins and physical therapy sessions that ended with her crying in the car on the way home, because the pain was a reminder she wasn't the same girl who used to dive without thinking. The pool was her sanctuary, the one place she felt whole again, where the water held her up without judgment or pain, where buoyancy meant more than physics. Then Valerie Kensington appeared, HOA president and self-declared guardian of Willow Creek Estate's morality, the woman who had turned neighborhood governance into a personal fiefdom. She moved with the rigid certainty of someone who believed rules were divine commandments handed down on stone tablets she alone could interpret, visor pulled low over eyes that missed nothing and forgave less, clipboard tucked under one arm like a general's battle plan, pearls glinting against her tan throat that had seen too many board meetings and not enough sunlight. She had been president for 8 years, elected unopposed after the previous one moved to a condo in Sarasota, because Valerie had made his life a living hell over a satellite dish that was 2 inches too high. No one ran against her because no one wanted the job, and because Valerie made it clear that opposition came with consequences, anonymous complaints, surprise inspections, fines that escalated until you paid just to make it stop. "You're in violation," Valerie announced, voice slicing through the chatter of kids cannonballing off the diving board and the splash of water against tile, the kind of voice that could make a grown man check his mailbox twice. Code 4B. Indecent exposure. Sarah froze, towel halfway to her shoulder, her face paling under the freckles she'd earned from years of swim team practice before the accident stole her season. The bikini she wore was modest, high-waisted bottoms and a top with thick straps that covered more than most one-pieces, the same one she'd had for 2 years, bought at Target with her own babysitting money after saving for months, because she wanted something that made her feel normal again. It was navy blue with white polka dots, the kind of suit grandmothers approved of and teenagers tolerated. Before I could cross the patio from where I sat reading the newspaper, folding it section by section the way my father taught me, Valerie reached out and snapped the strap against Sarah's skin. The crack echoed like a starter pistol at a track meet, sharp and unmistakable, cutting through the laughter and the splashes like a knife through butter. Gasps rose from the lounge chairs where mothers in cover-ups clutched their iced teas and fathers pretended to scroll their phones but watched from the corners of their eyes. A grandmother pulled her grandchild closer to her side, whispering something about strangers. My wife Elizabeth, Judge Elizabeth Harper from the county courthouse downtown, where she presided over cases that made the local news, dropped her legal thriller paperback, the one with the dog-eared pages and the coffee stain on Chapter 7, and was already moving, her sandals slapping against the hot concrete with the urgency of someone who had seen justice mocked one too many times. I got there first, stepping between them, my hand gentle on Sarah's arm, feeling her tremble under my palm like a bird with a broken wing. "Take your hands off my daughter," I said, voice low but carrying the weight of 15 years trying civil rights cases in courtrooms where words were weapons and silence was surrender, where I had learned that volume wasn't power but precision was. Valerie didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't even blink behind her designer sunglasses. "Community standards don't pause for feelings, Mr. Lawson. If she won't comply, I will." Elizabeth arrived then, her courthouse calm replaced by something colder, more dangerous, the kind of ice that forms on a judge's bench when a prosecutor has just lied under oath or a witness perjures themselves for the 3rd time. "You just committed assault," she said, her voice carrying across the pool like a gavel falling in a silent courtroom. "In front of 20 witnesses. On a minor. Battery, to be precise. Florida Statute 784.03. Valerie's smile was thin, practiced, the kind she used at board meetings when denying a fence variance for a family with a disabled child or approving her own landscaping exception that added a fountain no one else was allowed. "You'll receive formal notice tomorrow. And I suggest you teach your daughter modesty before someone else does. The community has standards, and they apply to everyone." She turned on her heel, sandals slapping against the concrete with the finality of a door slamming, leaving Sarah trembling under the towel I wrapped around her shoulders like a shield, the fabric absorbing her tears before they could fall. The red mark on her skin looked like a brand, angry and raised, a welt that would bruise by morning and scar in ways no one could see. The other families averted their eyes, suddenly fascinated by their phones or their children's floaties or the pattern of the tile grout. No one spoke. The silence was thicker than the humidity, a collective breath held in fear, the kind of fear that keeps good people quiet and lets bad ones rule. I guided Sarah home through the manicured streets, past identical white fences painted the exact shade of colonial cream mandated in Appendix C, past sprinkler systems hissing in perfect synchronization at 6:15 p.m. Sharp because Valerie had scheduled the irrigation zones herself, past lawns edged with military precision using string lines and levels. Every trimmed hedge shaped like a perfect sphere, every freshly painted mailbox with the house number in reflective vinyl, every driveway sealed in the approved sandstone tone felt like a trap we had willingly stepped into when we bought the house 5 years ago, seeking peace after the city's chaos of sirens and traffic and the courthouse shootings that still woke Elizabeth at night. We thought Willow Creek Estates would be safe, predictable, a place where the biggest worry was whether the garbage cans were out by 7 a.m. or if the holiday lights exceeded the wattage limit of 75 per string. We got Valerie instead, and with her came the realization that safety and control are not the same thing. Inside, the air conditioning hit like a slap, cold and artificial, the hum of the unit drowning out the cicadas for a moment. Sarah went straight to her room, door closing with a soft click that sounded final, the kind of click that says I'm done with the world for today. Elizabeth stood in the kitchen, hands braced on the granite counter we had installed last year after Valerie fined us for the old laminate being non-compliant with modern aesthetic standards, knuckles white, her wedding ring catching the light from the pendant lamps. She touched our child, she said, voice barely above a whisper but shaking with the effort to stay calm. In public. And called it enforcement. Called it standards. I didn't answer right away. I was already in my home office, pulling the HOA covenant from the file cabinet where it lived next to the tax returns and the warranty for the refrigerator, the binder thick as a phone book, its pages tabbed with colored stickers from Valerie's annual updates that arrived every January like clockwork, complete with a cover letter reminding us of our shared commitment to excellence. Elizabeth poured 2 fingers of bourbon from the bottle we kept for celebrations or catastrophes and stood behind me, reading over my shoulder as I flipped through sections on architectural guidelines that specified roof shingle overlap to the 16th of an inch, pet restrictions that required DNA testing for waste violations, holiday light wattage limits with diagrams showing approved extension cord gauges. There's no code for B, she said quietly after 10 minutes of silence broken only by the rustle of pages and the clink of ice in her glass. I've read this thing cover to cover for the landscape committee last year when she tried to ban my hydrangeas for being overly vibrant. Nothing about clothing, nothing about morality, nothing that gives anyone the right to touch a child. I highlighted as I went, the marker squeaking against the paper like a small animal in pain. Maintenance schedules with quarterly inspections, paint colors down to the exact Sherwin-Williams code for trim and accents, fence heights measured to the quarter-inch with variance requests requiring 3 board signatures, pet waste removal protocols with diagrams, and a fine schedule that escalated to $500 for the third offense. Nothing about swimsuits, nothing about straps, nothing that justified a grown woman laying hands on a teenager in front of her peers and parents. Valerie had invented a rule and enforced it with physical force. And no one at the pool had stopped her because they were afraid of what she might do to them next. The certified letter arrived at 8 sharp the next morning, delivered by a courier in a polo shirt embroidered with the HOA logo who wouldn't meet my eyes, as if the envelope itself was radioactive and might contaminate him. Inside, notice of violation, code 4B, indecent display. The language was clinical, almost surgical, designed to sound lawful while disguising the rot beneath, the kind of language that makes you feel guilty even when you know you're innocent. According to the notice, Sarah's attire and behavior had compromised the moral standards of the community, posing a risk to property values and family-friendly atmosphere by creating an environment of discomfort for other residents. Penalty, $100 first offense, escalating to $500 for subsequent violations, possible lien on the property if unpaid within 30 days, with interest accruing at the rate specified in Section 9F of the covenant. Elizabeth read it once, then a second time, then a third, her face doing that tight-jawed thing it does when she's on the bench and a prosecutor has just lied under oath or a witness perjures themselves for the 3rd time in a row. She put the assault in writing, she said, her voice flat but vibrating with fury. Confessed to the act and dressed it up as policy. As if snapping a child's clothing is an inspection. Evidence, I said, photographing every page with my phone, the flash reflecting off the HOA seal like a warning, the embossed eagle looking more like a vulture. I uploaded the images to a secure cloud folder labeled Willow Creek Case, the same way I had organized files for tenants fighting eviction or employees suing for discrimination. Sarah stayed in her room all day, hoodie pulled up despite the heat seeping through the windows, earbuds in, music loud enough to drown out the world but not the memory. When she finally emerged for dinner, her eyes were red-rimmed, the skin around them puffy from crying or from rubbing too hard. "Are we in trouble?" she asked, voice small, the voice of the girl who used to announce her swim times with pride but now whispered like someone might overhear. I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes, the kind of smile parents practice in mirrors. Not us. Just someone who forgot the law applies to everyone, even presidents. Her eyes flicked to the envelope on the table, then to me, then to Elizabeth, who was chopping vegetables with more force than necessary. "I don't want to go back to the pool," she said, and the words hung in the air like smoke. I reached across and took her hand, feeling the faint tremor, the way her fingers curled instinctively, as if to protect herself. "You won't have to until it's yours again. I promise." That night, while Sarah slept with the door locked for the first time in her life and the house fan whirring like a distant helicopter, I sat in my home office surrounded by the HOA covenant, a 3-ring binder thick as a phone book with tabs sticking out like surrender flags, and the digital bylaws downloaded from the association site onto my laptop. Elizabeth poured another bourbon from the bottle we kept for celebrations or catastrophes. This was definitely the latter, and stood behind me, reading over my shoulder as I flipped through sections on architectural guidelines that specified roof shingle overlap to the 16th of an inch and required photographs for approval. Pet restrictions that mandated DNA testing for waste violations with a third-party lab Valerie had chosen, holiday light wattage limits with diagrams showing approved, extension cord gauges, and a ban on anything that blinked more than once per second. I had joined this neighborhood to rest, not to fight. After years of civil rights litigation in the city, defending tenants from slumlords who let buildings crumble while raising rents, employees from discriminatory bosses who fired them for taking maternity leave, I wanted quiet. Elizabeth wanted a yard for Sarah to grow up in without the sound of gunshots echoing from the overpass, a pool for therapy after the accident that stole her season and her confidence, a community where the biggest worry was whether the garbage cans were out by 7 a.m. or if the holiday lights exceeded the wattage limit of 75 per string. We got Valerie instead, and with her came the realization that safety and control are not the same thing, that peace enforced by fear is just another word for prison. I started with the obvious, searching the Covenant PDF for B, morality, clothing, swimwear, inspection. Nothing. Then I expanded to the HOA portal, logging in with my homeowner credentials that Valerie had once threatened to revoke for a forgotten yard waste bag. Every rule, amendment, and community code was listed with timestamps, adoption dates, and board signatures in Valerie's looping cursive. I found clauses on exterior paint swatches that required submission of physical samples no less than 4 by 4 inches, pet DNA registration for waste violations with a fine schedule that escalated to $500 for the third offense and possible pet removal, even a ban on basketball hoops visible from the street between March and November because they detracted from seasonal curb appeal. But no morality ordinance, no clothing code, no inspection protocol that allowed physical contact. Valerie had written a ghost rule and enforced it like gospel. And the board had let her, because questioning Valerie meant becoming her next target. Elizabeth stopped pacing, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor we had refinished last year after Valerie cited us for uneven wear patterns. She's been doing this for years, she said, her voice low but sharp. The way people look away at the pool, the way conversations stop when she walks by at the mailbox cluster, the way the Garcias took down their garden gnome the day after she inspected their yard. It's not respect. It's fear. Cultivated fear. I nodded, closing the laptop with a soft click. Fear keeps her in power. Proof will take it away. And we start with the footage. The next morning, I walked to the HOA office, a narrow building attached to the clubhouse with tinted windows that made it look like it was hiding something, which it was. Inside, the air smelled of stale air freshener and control, the kind that comes from fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and beige carpet that muffled footsteps like secrets. Valerie's assistant, a thin woman named Janice with nervous eyes and a nameplate that read administrative coordinator, looked up from her computer and froze, her fingers hovering over the keyboard like she was afraid to type. Mr. Lawson, she said cautiously, her voice pitched higher than normal. Mrs. Kensington isn't available. She's at the county planning meeting. That's fine, I said, handing her a printed copy of the violation notice, the paper still warm from the printer. I'm submitting a formal request for all community bylaws, amendments, and board meeting minutes for the last 3 years, including any digital records or cloud backups. She hesitated, biting her lip, her eyes flicking to the closed door of Valerie's office where a brass plate read President. We don't usually release those without board approval. There's a process. I met her eyes, keeping my voice even but firm, the tone I used in depositions when witnesses started to squirm. Under Florida Statute 720.303, subsection 5, you're legally required to provide them within 10 business days upon written request from any member. I'd like a receipt with the date and your signature. Her fingers trembled slightly as she printed the confirmation form, the printer whirring like it was reluctant. When she handed it to me, she whispered, "You're not the first person she's done this to. Just be careful. She keeps files on everyone." The words hung in the air as I left, the door chime tinkling like a warning bell behind me. Outside, the midday sun glared off the HOA's immaculate landscaping, the flower beds mulched with pine straw in perfect 2-inch layers, the palm trees trimmed to identical heights. Everything looked orderly, but the silence underneath told a different story. Neighbors walked their dogs without looking up, their smiles brittle, their conversations dying when I got close. That's how fear spreads quietly through the things people stop saying, the glances they avoid, the doors they close a little faster. Back home, Elizabeth was on the phone with the county records office, her voice calm but clipped. There's no filing for any morality clause or amendment from Willow Creek Estates in the last 5 years, she said, hanging up with a decisive click. That confirms it. She's enforcing laws that don't exist. She's not just abusing power. She's inventing it. Sarah came downstairs then, hair still damp from the shower, wearing a sweatshirt despite the heat seeping through the windows like an unwelcome guest. Are we in trouble? She asked quietly, her eyes flicking to the envelope on the table, then to the binder open on the counter, then to me and Elizabeth as if we were strangers in her own home. I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes, the kind of smile parents practice in mirrors when the world feels too big. Not us. Just someone who forgot the law applies to everyone, even presidents with clipboards. Her eyes flicked to the envelope again, then to me, Then to Elizabeth, who was chopping vegetables with more force than necessary, the knife thudding against the cutting board like a gavel. "I don't want to go back to the pool," she said, and the words hung in the air like smoke from a fire no one wanted to acknowledge. I reached across and took her hand, feeling the faint tremor, the way her fingers curled instinctively, as if to protect herself from the memory. "You won't have to until it's yours again. I promise. And this time, I mean it." That evening, I drafted my own letter, formal, factual, and deliberate, the kind of letter that lands on a desk and changes everything. It cited the statute requiring the HOA to disclose governing documents within 10 days and reminded them that fabricated ordinances carry civil penalties under state law, including potential personal liability for board members who enforce them. I copied the entire board, including Valerie, and attached the county records confirmation showing no such ordinance existed. When I hit send at 11:47 p.m., the quiet satisfaction was almost physical, like the first deep breath after surfacing from underwater, the kind of breath that says you're still alive and still fighting. Later, as twilight settled and the sprinklers hissed across the lawns in perfect synchronization at 6:15 p.m., sharp because Valerie had scheduled the irrigation zones herself using a spreadsheet she shared at the annual meeting, I stood on the porch watching Valerie's house glow across the lake. It was grand, symmetrical, guarded by a row of Italian cypress she'd had planted after finding 3 neighbors for inappropriate tree species that blocked her view of the water. It wasn't privacy she wanted. It was dominance, the kind that comes from knowing everyone is watching but no one is speaking. Elizabeth joined me, handing me a glass of iced tea sweetened with just enough sugar to cut the bitterness. "You're really doing this," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 courtroom verdicts. "Yeah," I said, watching the light from Valerie's windows reflect off the lake like distorted stars, each one a lie she had told and someone had believed. Because if she can do this to Sarah, she can do it to anyone. And silence is what lets her. But silence ends tonight. I didn't know it then, but the notice she'd mailed that morning would become Exhibit A in her own downfall, the first domino in a chain that would topple her empire one forged document at a time. 2 days later, I found Marcus Tate waiting near the maintenance shed behind the clubhouse, the one with the faded green paint and the lock that stuck in the humidity. His shoulders hunched, his uniform damp with sweat and worry, the smell of chlorine drifting from the pool sharp and artificial like a chemical promise. He wasn't supposed to be there during off hours, and he knew it, his eyes scanning the parking lot like every shadow might be Valerie in disguise. When I approached, he glanced around like every palm frond had ears and every sprinkler head was a camera. "Mr. Lawson," he muttered, keeping his voice low, barely above the hum of the pool filter. "You didn't hear this from me. Promise me that." He was in his late 50s, the kind of man who fixed things others broke, who knew every pipe and filter in the neighborhood by heart, who had replaced the same diverter valve 3 times because Valerie insisted on the cheapest parts. His hands were always moving, wiping sweat with a rag that had seen better days, tugging at the brim of his cap embroidered with the HOA logo, rubbing the back of his neck where the sun had burned him despite the SPF 50. Nervous tells. His whole body carried the guilt of someone caught between survival and conscience, between the paycheck that paid for his wife's medication and the granddaughter's braces. "I saw what happened the other day," he said at the pool, his voice cracking on the word saw. "The whole thing. From the pump room window." I nodded once, letting silence invite the truth, the way I had learned in depositions when witnesses were on the verge of breaking. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing like a buoy in rough water. "She told me to delete the camera footage that same evening. Said it was a privacy issue, that residents had complained about inappropriate content, but I know that wasn't true. There were no complaints." She said, "Your daughter embarrassed the community by refusing to cover up." His voice cracked around the word embarrassed, like he couldn't believe he'd repeated it aloud, like the words tasted bad in his mouth. My pulse steadied, the lawyer in me taking over, compartmentalizing the anger into folders labeled later. "Did you delete it?" He looked down at his boots, scuffed and salt-stained from years of pool deck chemicals, the silence heavier than any answer. His fingers tightened on the keyring clipped to his belt, the keys jangling softly. "I did," he said finally, but only after she stood there watching me do it. Stood right behind me, breathing down my neck. I didn't have a choice. She threatened to fire me on the spot. Said she'd tell the board I was stealing time, padding hours, maybe even dipping into the chemical budget. "I've got a mortgage, Mr. Lawson. My wife's on disability after the stroke. We can't lose the insurance. One missed payment, and we're done." There it was, the quiet confession, raw and human, the kind of confession that doesn't come from evil, but from exhaustion. A man forced to choose between his family's survival and his principles, between the job that kept the lights on and the conscience that kept him up at night. His eyes darted toward the clubhouse door again, and I could see the weight of every order she barked at him, every time he looked the other way to keep his job, every time he told himself it was just one more thing. "You didn't do anything wrong, Marcus," I said, my voice steady but kind. "You followed instructions under pressure. Duress, actually. But what she did, that's a crime. Battery on a minor. And now there's no record of it because she coerced you." He hesitated, then shook his head, his cap casting a shadow over his eyes. "Not exactly." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small USB drive wrapped in electrical tape, the kind he used for pump schematics and maintenance logs. His hands trembled as he offered it to me, the tape peeling at the edges. System does automatic backups every 36 hours to the cloud server the board pays for. I copied one before she found out. Didn't sleep for 2 days thinking about it. My wife says I'm a fool, but I kept seeing your girl's face. I stared at the drive resting in my palm, small and silver, heavier than gold, warmer than it should be. You realize what this means? Yeah, he said, voice shaking like the leaves in the breeze. It means I'm done here if she ever finds out. My wife's medication, my granddaughter's braces, the mortgage on the house we've lived in for 23 years. All gone. She'll make sure of it. She's done it before. He stepped back, running a hand down his face, the lines around his eyes deeper than I'd noticed before, etched by years of looking the other way. She's been like this for years, mister. Lawson. Picks targets, makes up rules, scares people into silence. Last year, she fined the Johnsons because their grandkids played chalk games on the sidewalk. Said it defaced community property. They paid $200 just to make it stop. The Ramirez family took down their Virgin Mary statue after she called it religiously divisive. Mrs. Lang removed her wind chimes because Valerie said the sound was non-compliant with community serenity standards. She measures decibels with an app on her phone. I felt anger rise again, hot and sharp, but I kept it contained, folded it into the part of my mind labeled use later. Emotion doesn't win cases. Facts do. Why are you telling me now? He let out a long breath and looked past me at the pool, the reflection of the water shimmering in his eyes, fractured light trembling across a face carved by regret and chlorine. Because I saw your daughter's face when it happened, he said quietly, his voice breaking on the word daughter. And I've got granddaughters about her age. One of them starts high school next year. I kept thinking, what if it was her? What if some woman with a clipboard decided my granddaughter was a violation? I can't sleep knowing I stayed quiet. My wife says I'm a coward. Maybe I am. But I can't be that kind anymore. Not after seeing that look. That hit deeper than I expected, a punch to the gut that stole my breath for a second. Marcus wasn't built for rebellion. He was built to keep things running smoothly, to fix leaks before they became floods, to avoid notice and keep his head down so he could go home to his family. But that moment at the pool had cracked something in him, the same way it had cracked something in all of us, a fracture that let the light in. He was sweating despite the mild breeze, one hand gripping the chain-link fence like it might hold him upright, his knuckles white against the rust. You've done the right thing, I told him, my voice steady but kind, the way I spoke to witnesses who were finally telling the truth after years of lying to protect someone else. I'll make sure no one knows where this came from. You have my word. And Marcus? You're not a coward. Cowards don't risk everything to do what's right. He nodded once, but didn't look convinced, his eyes clouded with the kind of doubt that comes from years of being told you're nothing. Just be careful, okay? She's connected. Her brother sits on the city zoning board. She brags about it at the Christmas party. Told me once she could have my contractor's license pulled if I didn't cooperate on the pool chemical bids. Said she had friends in permitting. I pocketed the drive carefully, the plastic warm from his hand, the tape sticking to my fingers. That's intimidation, Marcus. Coercion. And it won't last much longer. Not with this. He glanced toward the clubhouse again. Valerie's car, a pristine silver SUV with a vanity plate reading Stards 1, was parked near the front, the bumper sticker proclaiming my other car is a gavel. The sight of it made him flinch, his shoulders hunching further. I need to get back before she notices I'm gone. She times my brakes. Go, I said. And thank you. Truly. This took courage. He hesitated one more second, his eyes meeting mine with a mix of fear and resolve, the kind of look you see in witnesses who know they're about to change everything but might lose it all in the process. Before walking off, his steps heavy, head low, like every movement might betray him to the woman who had made his life a series of small surrenders. Watching him disappear down the path between the palms, past the perfectly spaced lantana beds Valerie had approved in shades of coral and yellow but no red because red was too aggressive, I realized something important. Valerie's empire wasn't built on strength, or even popularity, or even the rules she claimed to love. It was built on fear, the kind that keeps good people quiet and bad ones in power, the kind that makes a man delete evidence to feed his family. I drove home with the USB drive burning a hole in my pocket, the air conditioning in the car doing little to cool the heat of what I held. In a single act of quiet courage, Marcus had given me the one thing Valerie didn't believe existed, evidence she couldn't control or delete or intimidate away. At home, Elizabeth was in the kitchen prepping dinner, but she stopped when she saw my face, the knife hovering over the cutting board. What is it? Footage, I said, holding up the drive like it was a winning lottery ticket. From the pool. Marcus saved it before she made him delete it. She dried her hands on a towel, her judge's mask slipping into place, the one she wore when a case was about to turn. Let's see it. Now. We watched in the office, the grainy timestamp counting seconds like a heartbeat, the pool deck bathed in harsh sunlight, the lounge chairs filled with families who would later pretend they saw nothing. The kids splashing, the mothers chatting, the fathers scrolling. Then Valerie approaching Sarah, her finger jabbing like a weapon, her hand reaching, the strap snapping back with a sound that made Elizabeth's jaw clench so tight I heard it. Sarah's flinch, the way she curled into herself like a flower closing at dusk. The neighbors looking away, one by one, as if eye contact might make them next. The whole thing lasted 12 seconds, but it felt like 12 years, each frame a small eternity of humiliation. Elizabeth paused the video on Valerie's face, twisted with self-righteous fury, her mouth open mid-sentence, her eyes narrowed behind the sunglasses. "Assault on a minor," she said, her voice flat but vibrating with the kind of anger that could level buildings. "Battery. Florida Statute 784.03. And she documented it in the violation notice. She's handed us the case on a silver platter with her own handwriting. I saved copies to 3 encrypted drives, then uploaded one to my firm's secure server, the same server that had stored evidence for multi-million-dollar settlements. She thinks she's untouchable because no one fights back. Because everyone's afraid of the fines, the liens, the social ostracism." Elizabeth's eyes narrowed to slits, the look she gave defendants who thought charm could replace facts. She's about to learn what happens when someone does. And that someone has a judge for a wife and a lawyer for a husband. The retaliation began the next day, precise and petty, the way Valerie liked it. A citation slipped under our door at 7:03 a.m. For mailbox paint not matching approved colonial cream. Our mailbox was colonial cream, repainted last spring with the exact Sherwin-Williams code Valerie had approved in writing. Then a warning at 11:17 a.m. about lawn height exceeding 4 inches by half an inch, measured with a ruler she photographed as evidence and emailed to the board with the subject line urgent compliance issue. Then a notice at 3:42 p.m. that our porch light violated wattage limits, despite being the same LED bulb every house used. The one Valerie had bulk ordered from a supplier her brother-in-law owned. Each arrived in crisp envelopes with the HOA seal embossed in gold foil, Valerie's signature flourishing at the bottom like a royal seal, the ink still wet as if she had signed them herself with glee. Sarah stopped going outside altogether. She wore hoodies in 90-degree heat, arms crossed like armor, jumping at every mail truck rumble or the sound of a car door slamming. Elizabeth's judicial restraint cracked when she found our daughter crying in the shower, scrubbing at the red mark that had faded to a faint pink line, but not the memory, the water running cold because she couldn't feel it anymore. "We end this," Elizabeth said, her voice steel-forged in courtrooms and tempered by justice. "Now, no more waiting." I called a meeting at the diner off the interstate, neutral ground 2 towns over where no one from Willow Creek would wander in for coffee and pie because the coffee was burnt and the pie was from a box. 8 neighbors showed up, the ones Valerie had targeted over the years like a hunter with a quota. The Garcias for a garden gnome shaped like a flamingo that Valerie called tasteless kitsch. The Thompsons for sidewalk chalk that washed away in the first rain but still earned a $50 fine for unauthorized surface alteration. Mrs. Lang for wind chimes that played a melody Valerie deemed non-compliant with community serenity standards because they tinkled during her afternoon nap. The Patels for a Diwali rangoli on their driveway that Valerie called cultural graffiti. The Millers for a basketball hoop net that was eggshell instead of pure white. The kind of infraction that required a $25 replacement and a written apology. They brought their own stacks of violations, eyes wide with the realization they weren't alone, that the emperor had no clothes and the clothes she wore were stolen from their peace of mind. Marcus arrived last, sliding into the booth with a manila envelope thick as a sandwich, his hands still smelling of chlorine. "Her private files," he whispered, pushing it across the table. "Copied from the office computer during her yoga class. She does hot yoga every Thursday at 3. Passwords her dog's name plus the year she won the HOA election. Pompous 1 2017. Inside, private photos taken from residents' social media, zoomed in on swimsuits and shorts and tank tops. Screenshots of text messages complaining about fines, some from group chats Valerie had infiltrated with a burner account. A list titled Compliance Priority, with Sarah's name at the top in red, followed by the Garcias, the Thompsons, Mrs. Lang, and the crown jewel, a document labeled M4B proof, bearing a county seal, but with metadata showing creation on Valerie's laptop 3 months ago at 2:14 a.m. The ordinance number matched a 2021 plumbing permit for a sink replacement in Unit 14B, the kind of permit that cost $35 and took 10 minutes to file. Elizabeth's eyes narrowed to slits, the look she gave defendants who thought charm could replace facts or forgery could replace law. Felony forgery. She didn't just invent the rule. She faked government authorization using a toilet permit. We had everything: assault on video, falsified records, harassment campaign, coercion of an employee, defamation in writing. I drafted the petition for an emergency board hearing that night, citing the statute requiring 10% of homeowners to force a vote. We exceeded it by morning. Signatures collected house by house under the cover of sprinkler noise and early dog walks, each neighbor signing with a pen that trembled but didn't stop. The hearing was set for Saturday in the community clubhouse, but Valerie tried to cancel it, claiming improper notice and threatening legal action in an email that arrived at 3:07 a.m. with the subject line cease and desist. The county compliance office intervened with a single email at 8:42 a.m. Proceed or face sanctions for noncompliance with State Law 720.303. Attendance mandatory. The room was packed, folding chairs scraping linoleum, tension thick as the humidity outside that made everyone's shirts stick to their backs. Valerie stood at the podium in a navy suit tailored to perfection, pearls gleaming against her throat like tiny handcuffs, voice steady, but eyes darting like a cornered animal that knows the trap is closing. She had slides projected on a screen that flickered slightly because the projector bulb was overdue for replacement, but Valerie had vetoed the expense. Sarah's bikini photo cropped to look revealing with red circles around the straps. My citation stack labeled harassment with a graph showing escalating noncompliance. A bar chart claiming declining property values due to moral decay caused by certain residents who refused to uphold community values. When she finished, her chest heaving slightly from the effort of her performance, the board chair, a retired accountant named Leonard who had once been fined for a basketball hoop net that was eggshell instead of pure white and still harbored a grudge, cleared his throat with a sound like gravel in a blender. Mr. Lawson, your response. I walked to the front carrying a single binder, every page tabbed and highlighted in the colors Valerie loved so much. Colonial cream for citations, sandstone for statutes. This isn't about morality. I began, my voice carrying without a microphone because the room had gone so quiet you could hear the air conditioning click on. It's about legality. And the law doesn't care about your feelings, Mrs. Kensington. It cares about facts. I projected the county certification, no record of code 4B in any official archive, the number belonging to a plumbing permit for a kitchen sink in 2021. Then the metadata from Valerie's forgery, the creation date glowing on the screen like a confession. Then the security footage, paused on the moment her hand met Sarah's skin. The sound of the snap filling the room through the speakers Marcus had helped install last year. Gasps turned to murmurs, turned to outrage that filled the room like smoke from a fire no one had called in. Leonard stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. Effective immediately, Code 4B is suspended. All violations under it are void. The board votes to remove Valerie Kensington as president and refer this matter to county authorities for criminal investigation into forgery, assault, and coercion. Valerie lunged for the microphone, her pearls swinging like a pendulum counting down her seconds. You can't. I've kept this community safe for 8 years. I've increased property values. Elizabeth rose from the front row, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade through silk. You kept it afraid. There's a difference. And fear isn't leadership. It's tyranny. The vote was unanimous, the sound of I echoing like gunshots in a canyon. Valerie was escorted out by 2 deputies who had arrived midway through my presentation, their boots echoing on the tile like a funeral march. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just walked, heels clicking like a metronome counting down her reign, her face pale as the colonial cream mailboxes she loved so much, her empire crumbling with every step. The next week, the for sale sign went up in her yard, planted crookedly in the perfect grass that was already starting to brown at the edges. The house sold in 3 days to a young couple from Orlando who asked if the pool was kid-friendly and if they could paint the mailbox teal because their daughter loved mermaids. Sarah was already there, diving in without looking over her shoulder, her laughter echoing off the water like it had never been stolen. Willow Creek Estates held a potluck by the lake that weekend, the kind of potluck that happens when people remember their neighbors, not subjects. No agendas, no clipboards, no rules about lawn chairs or potato salad recipes or whether the deviled eggs had too much paprika. The Garcias brought empanadas filled with beef and raisins. The Thompsons brought sidewalk chalk in a bucket the size of a trash can. Mrs. Lang brought wind chimes that played a melody everyone agreed was perfect. The Patels brought samosas and a Rangoli kit for the kids to try on the basketball court. The Millers brought a new basketball hoop net in eggshell because they liked the color. Marcus grilled burgers on the community grill he had cleaned himself that morning, his granddaughter splashing with Sarah, their shrieks of joy the soundtrack of a neighborhood reborn from the ashes of fear. The covenants were rewritten by a committee of residents, not tyrants, in a series of meetings held in the clubhouse with the windows open and the air conditioning off because someone suggested fresh air might be good for democracy. Morality stayed where it belonged, in churches, families, and consciences, not in rulebooks enforced by force or forgery. The pool lights glowed every night, but now they reflected freedom, not fear, the water rippling with cannonballs and laughter instead of silence and submission. I stood on the dock at sunset months later, Elizabeth's hand in mine, watching Sarah teach the new neighbor's kid how to float on her back, her voice patient and proud. The water was calm, the sky streaked orange and pink, the kind of evening that makes you believe in second chances and the resilience of ordinary people. Think it'll stay this way? Elizabeth asked, her voice soft, the voice she used when she took off the robe and became just my wife again. It already has, I said, squeezing her hand. Once people remember they can say no, they don't forget. And once they see what happens when they fight back together, they don't go back to silence. They build something better. The pool lights flickered on, reflecting a community that had chosen freedom over fear, joy over control, truth over forgery. And for the first time in years, the only sound was laughter, real and unscripted, the sound of a neighborhood healing one splash, one chalk drawing, one potluck dish at a time. So tell me in the comments, when does protecting community standards cross into abuse of power? Where do you draw the line between safety and control, between enforcement and assault? Have you ever watched someone weaponize rules against the vulnerable, and what did it take to stop them? Was it worth the fight, or should some battles be left unfought? When does standing up for your child become a crusade, and when does it become obsession? Speak your truth, stand your ground, and let the algorithm carry your voice further than any HOA president ever could.